So with this being the opening episode of Silver Flames, I have to bring up the cover. There is a mask, and above the mask, there is a partially covered sun. I'm going to call it a setting sun, aka dusk. Is this an Easter egg for us readers for Nesta's future? Possibly as High Lady of the Dusk Court, especially with all these goddamn queen mentions. And I guess it could be or, is this a tie to her being Starborn Fae, which we will talk about more in a second.
She even goes to the prison in this book, which is where the Dusk Court used to be.
Do you think she's going to be High Lady?
I don't know about High Lady. I have so many thoughts that are still kind of jumbled around, so I cannot wait to start getting them all clear and to start conveying them and processing and talking all about the Dusk Court, the prison, the Starbornness. Like, it all ties together, and I can't wait.
I have a feeling we're just going to be brushing the surface. And as I was writing this out, I had to keep reminding myself, this is episode 1. I can't go all into this. But we are just going to be brushing the surface with this theory today. But that theory is that Nesta, and therefore the rest of the Archeron sisters, are descendants from the Starborn Fae line. Yes, Bryce, Rune, Rhysand, Thea, Helena, Seline, all of them. As we discussed in our ACOSF coverage during chapter 55, that Feyre starts glowing with starlight. There are so many mentions of starlight. And when asked if it's the Day Court, it was never really confirmed that that's where the power came from.
And we've kept bringing it up since then, like with Feyre's crown that could have originally been Thea's from an ACOWAR episode.
But this star language is just getting started in this book with Nesta emerging from the cauldron as, quote, a newborn star. And she also looks at the night sky from the House of Wind. Quote, she lets starlight gently brush her head, her face, her neck, imagined it running its shimmering fingers down her neck, as her mother had done for her and her alone. This cannot be an accident with how this is written. Literally talking about starlight and then bringing up her mother. So this is the question. Is their mother the descendant of the Seline line of the Starborn Fae, aka the Fae warrior that the Bone Carver discussed back in ACOWAR, whose bloodline still runs through some human line, aka the Archerons? We know from Seline that when she came back to Prythian, she mated with the High Lord of Night and they had babies. Was there a lost child, either through them or even just somewhere down the line, and they went to go live with the humans, maybe even, I won't say mate, but maybe mate, but go be with the humans, and then they stayed in the human realm? Yes, Lexi?
What if, because they lived in Valaris, and one of them decided to go be a merchant and then took off, and they are actually from Papa Archeron's line?
Okay. Okay. I honestly am so torn.
I contributed to Spice Watch.
I can't decide if this would be from Mama Archeron or Papa Archeron, because there's so many question marks when it comes from Mama Archeron. For instance, Tamlin saying, like, your mother never told you stories about us.
Yes.
Like, all of those little hints. But Papa Archeron is so intertwined with all things Prythian through Spice Watch and Gem Watch and all those things watch. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's both of them. That's a little weird, but maybe. I don't know. I can't decide. But at this point, it is so canon to me that the Archerons are descendants of the Starborn Fae. Like, that is so that's not even a question of mine anymore.
I agree. And all this discussion about a newborn star and Nesta's connection with stars, that's not even taking into the fact that Bryce has the same star on her and all of the implications that that has. Again, we will be getting into that throughout this deep dive. Bryce's parting words to Nesta are, quote, I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why.
8-pointed star. How many words is, and she emerged from the cauldron at, like, an emerged star, whatever the fuck I said earlier, that is 8 words. Like,
And honestly, at this point, we just need a whole episode about this entire Starborn theory and how it connects to everything and how it connects to all these different characters. Because the evidence is all there that the Archeron sisters are descendants of the Starborn Fae.
Absolutely. Pivoting ever so slightly, this is a shorter one, but Nesta saying, quote, she didn't know where she belonged in this world either. I couldn't help but think of my favorite moment from Flame and Shadow when Ember says to Nesta, quote, you'll find your way. Nesta, by the end of this book, has a found family, but as we learned in House of Flame and Shadow, there's still something missing. Maybe that could do with the Dust Court. There's this something missing, and she feels like she finally needs to go back to her ultimate homeland, I'll call it. Now, we talked about, is she going to be the queen of the Dust Court or the High Lady of the Dust Court? I could see that. One of the things that I see more is her, I'll call it resurrecting. She's the queen of death, resurrecting the Dust Court.
Yes, especially being like the master of the Dread Trove. And remember too, the cauldron is the creator of all life as well. And its magic is directly tied into all of the land. And even though Nesta did give her power back, which we will explore all of that at a later time too.
But she didn't though, because she has it in Flame and Shadow.
Yes, that's the confusing thing. This book is going to give us a headache.
I feel like I need to
Let's move on to something a little bit easier to understand.
Rhys has a model that he built centuries ago that, quote, somehow allowed Rhys to ponder the existence of life outside their own world and other things. Sure. Who else has one of these other than the priestesses? The Autumn King. His purpose was wanting to learn their original homeland of the Fae and the truth behind it.
Which is where Rhys and them are.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
I do wonder if this little, I'll call it Easter egg, is here for us to prep for Crescent City, Sky and Breath.
Yes.
Because Sky and Breath came out a year after Silver Flames was released in 2021. So it's almost like it's foreshadowing, but for another series.
Yes, it makes me think that SJM was letting us know that, hey, these worlds absolutely live within the same universe. And like you're saying, it was definitely prepping us for the crazy ending of Sky and Breath.
Still one of my favorite endings ever. But this also makes me wonder if Rhys knows that there's other life. Do you think we're going to get more crossovers of Maasverse characters? Like, because of Rhys's, I won't even say because of Rhys's research, but because of the foreshadowing of Rhys's research. I think if anything, it would be from the 26th string of the harp.
I don't know if, you know what I actually think, and I don't even want to say it, is that it could potentially tie into him becoming High King. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but you know how knowledge is power, and he has knowledge about other worlds. I really do think that he and Meryl are going to connect and figure some things out. Or maybe, you know, after Bryce left, he goes to the library to start learning about, you know, how a girl with pink sneakers dropped out of the sky. And that's where he and Meryl start pairing up and they start doing way more work. And then that expands into more possibilities there. So that's actually not tied to the High King whatsoever. But yeah.
I definitely think that this is priming us readers to get ready for more Maasverse connections. Yes.
Yes. And I do think that Rhys will be a key player in those connections. There.
I agree.
I'll say that.
I am going to be very curious how SJM handles the next ACOTAR book, because if it's post Bryce landing in Prythian, they can't just not talk about that.
I do think that from here on, it's going to be you have to have read this book in order to read this book, and it is going to get a little bit complicated.
I genuinely do hope so. I hope that it is, you have to have read at least Flame and Shadow, because yes, there's a lot of information, and yes, it's going to start getting complicated. If SJM tries to dance around the fact that a girl with pink sneakers was here in the realm, that's going to get more complicated, especially if it's post Bryce having been in Prythian, which I can't.
And then the entire download that Azriel and Nesta did receive.
Well, too. And the fact that Seline looks like Rhys's sister, like.
So many loose ends. Yes.
I need the date for ACOTAR 6, please, God.
We are now entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode, where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories. Today, we are discussing ideas with spoilers from the entire Maasverse. So please only continue listening if you have read all of the books from Crescent City and Throne of Glass.
Alrighty. Back to the Rhys's last name conversation. There are, of course, some Maasverse theories around this. God, I love this community. Most popular being Dannon, especially with the likeness to Rune. But we do know that Rune takes after his mother in likeness, and the Autumn King's last name is Dannon. So unfortunately, I do think we can rule out Dannon here. So that brings me to another one. What if his last name is Haviljord, and Rune's mother's last name was Haviljord? And there's just a bunch of these Haviljord lines in these different worlds. However, here's the wrench. Gavin Haviljord Havyard was the first Havyard that we know of in Dorian's line, and he is human. So it could be Seline's blood is still running through the Havyard's line, and that's the human line that the bone carver was referring to, which Seline does look like Rhys's sister. So that's not out of the question. However, there's also the idea, and I love this idea, it's that Rhys's last name could be something absolutely ridiculous. We've had Fenris Moonbeam, and Lorcan became Lorcan Luckin. So I'm leaning more towards this option. And like, what if Rhysand's name is like Nighthawk or something like that? Like, I am Nighthawk.
You must call me Nighthawk. I am Dragon. Shout out if you've seen that meme. It went super viral, and I was very proud of myself.
It was so good. I love that meme.
So here is a question, though. Do we ever know what Fionn and Thea's last name is?
We do not.
Because we know that Seline marries the High Lord of the Night Court, so it probably wouldn't go through her line with the last name. But anyway.
That's a last name we're not being told for a reason, for sure.
I'm probably going to be in the minority here, and this is not fun whatsoever, but I think that we as a fandom are looking into the last names a little more than SJM, and she just didn't come up with last names.
Yeah, I think we're all so starved for anything ACOTAR that we're like, it's Rhys and Nighthawk. Anyway, moving on to my second and final Maasverse madness. It's a short one today. Nesta falling down the stairs. When she does fall down the stairs, Nesta, quote, blinked at her hand. She'd seen sparks. With all the witch and witchcraft language around Nesta, people wonder if there is some witchness in her lineage. And there's some theories wondering if she tapped into almost having iron teeth claws in this moment. Personally, I actually wonder if this is more her Starborn power, if she is of the Starborn line, which I'm convinced she is. We never see Bryce use any Starborn power that sparks come about, but maybe the parasite in the water could be dimming it. So in my opinion, this is Nesta accidentally tapping into Starborn magic.
So I do think that this is specifically referring to her silver flames, which we know Nesta will wield very specifically in House of Flame and Shadow. Well, friends, we are now going to enter our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode, where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories. Today, we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from all 3 Crescent City books and the first 3 Throne of Glass books through Heir of Fire. So please only continue listening if you've read all of those books.
We have to continue the conversation around the bargain tattoo because, oh my God, there is so much more layered to this now that we've read House of Flame and Shadow.
Did you all know that Bryce has the exact same 8-pointed star on her chest? It's a scar there. Oh my God.
I know. Oh my. So we know from Bryce that her scar came out, quote, when I ... revealed who I was, what I am to the world. I drew the star out of my chest. This got me thinking, because when Nesta decides to train to tap into that purpose, that is hers and hers alone to choose. That is when the mark appears on her skin. We know that the 8-pointed star is also on the floor of the prison that used to be the Dusk Court. We do know from Bryce to Nesta, quote, I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why. Nesta has to resurrect the Dusk Court, right? Like, are we in agreement on this? And it would also be so poetic with her power being death if she were to resurrect something.
I love that so much. Yes. Well, and then also, if we remember in House of Flame and Shadow, Bryce's star is directing her to that location in the prison there. Now, Nesta no longer has her 8-pointed star, but she does point to Bryce and say, I used to have that exact same tattoo on me. And now with Bryce, it's a scar, while with Nesta, of course, it's a tattoo.
And earlier, what you were saying with that symbol used to be connected with the OG people of the Dusk Court. There's no way Nesta's not a descendant from Thea. Like, there's no way.
That's my biggest thing too, is that I really do think that they are descendants.
Yeah, same.
I mean, going back to what Bryce said, I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why. I think that they are going to find out that they are descendants of Thea.
Same.
Yes.
I do too. Do you think they're going to go into the prison and it will be the 3 Archeron sisters? So maybe we're going to get the next ACOTAR book is actually going to be split POV between Elaine, Azriel, Nesta, and maybe Lucian too. I hope Lucian. But it's going to be a split between Elaine's story and also this continuation of Nesta's story at the prison and learning about Dusk and all that kind of stuff. Or do you feel like that feels like two different books to me, but I don't know.
It really feels like two different books. I will say that I don't know if nervous is the right word for it, but I am curious to see how this is going to go with ACOTAR 6 because there are so many different loose ends, both with what we've been waiting for from ACOTAR as well as some of the setup that we got in House of Flame and Shadow. So I can't help but think it has to be Azriel and Elaine, whether it's them being together or their own separate stories. But Nesta has such a big question mark next to her, too. And I don't see us going on Nesta's journey from a different character's POV.
No.
But if we have Nesta and Elaine, it might feel a little too crowded.
I will say House of Flame and Shadow was like 7 people's POV. And I do think we're going to be steering away from 2 people POV and into more like 4 or 5. And it's not my favorite, I'll be honest, but we have been with these characters for so long that it might feel a little bit different. I do wonder though, because Nesta's not the only one with this tattoo. It is Cassian as well. So, but I don't think it's from his past. I think it was tattooed on him with this bargain because it was a bargain with Nesta, because she's extra powerful with the cauldron, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But I do wonder, with that mark being placed on him, does that mean he's going to be tied to the Dusk Court and all the courts and all that kind of stuff?
I think it goes back to because Nesta is his mate.
Yeah.
That is why he's tied into it.
Agree.
Yes. So his destiny, his fate is tied directly to hers.
This is a really small thing, but I loved this so much. Gwen enjoyed the dusk services more than anything because she thinks the music is beautiful at that time. And that got me thinking, the Valkyries, I'm going to talk about the core 3 Valkyries with Emery, Gwen, and Nesta. If Nesta does go and resurrect the Dusk Court, do you think Gwen's going to go with her and Emery?
I think I could definitely see that. Yeah.
I think it'll entirely depend on if they go with their partners, because we're assuming that Mor and Emery are going to be together. And then maybe if Gwen and Azriel are together, which who knows, but that's a possibility.
I don't see Azriel leaving the Night Court.
I don't either.
Even though he doesn't like the Illyrians.
He does hate the Illyrians. But I don't know. No, actually, you know what? I said I don't either, but I don't know. Because there is like that, there's a few lines where he's like, I don't feel like I've ever belonged. Or where Rhys mentions how he never feels like he's ever belonged. So actually, I'm going to take that back. I could see Azriel yeeting.
So I will say, when I was talking earlier about how Nesta might resurrect it and how they would then be at the Dusk Court, there's still the issue of the prison.
Yeah.
And the reason that area is so barren is because Seline was bringing all of those monsters to the prison, and it turned into the prison. And because of all of their terrible power, it like leached the life out of that area. So I don't know how in the world they will resurrect life back here with those monsters still at the prison. They would literally have to move the monsters to somewhere else.
I have no idea. I have no idea how that's going to work.
You know what? I think that Ramiel might be our new Under Ramiel.
That's the new Isle Kingdoms. Is that what you're saying?
That's the new Isle Kingdoms. Yeah, Under Ramiel.
Amazing. All right, last one. We have to go back to Blue Annis, which is one of the monsters that Cassian trapped in the prison. Blue Annis has cobalt skin and iron claws. She is a female who has a taste for human flesh. Does this sound mighty familiar to anyone else? Hello, Iron Teeth witches, especially because there's the whole Blue Blood clan with, I mean, yes, it's cobalt skin, but still there's the Blue Bloods, and that is not that far off. But here's what got me thinking. Lanthus, we know, is the father of the bogey. What if Blue Annis was the mother of the Iron Teeth witches?
Possibly. Okay, we are officially entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode, where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories. Today, we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from all 3 Crescent City books, most of all, House of Flame and Shadow, so please only continue listening if you've read the series. Okay, so first and foremost, let's keep the serial tea time on the Dread Trove going. Also, real quick, you all, it is getting so hard with Silver Flames and discussing some of these concepts and having to keep the spoilers out of it.
Because it's like some things that we absolutely know from Crescent City are only speculatory in ACOTAR. So it's like, we have to be like, well, and there's this possible 4th object. Let's Luna's horn. Like, it's so hard.
And I'm also not trying to make these like Crescent City serial tea times either. So I'm trying to make sure that it is relevant to ACOTAR. So anyway, here goes. We have to spill the beans on the fourth dread trove object, Luna's horn. This could honestly be its own episode, so I'm going to do my best to summarize it as it relates to the dread trove. The horn, made out of ancient bone, is able to open the rifts between worlds, and it serves as a bridge between realms. How useful for a multiverse! This is seriously one of my favorite parts about how the Maasverse connects. When this all unraveled with the fourth dread trove object and all of that, my jaw was on the floor and I was so excited. More than 15,000 years ago, when the horn was on its home planet where ACOTAR is, and the Asteri/Daglin were defeated, Queen Thea used the horn and the harp to open a portal into Midgard and lead her people, plus some from the Autumn Court, to this seemingly welcome planet. Her daughters, Helena and Seline, used the horn and the harp to open up a portal back into Prythian, but only Seline, the harp, and Truth Teller made it back. Both Helena and the horn stayed behind in Midgard. After this and the battle with Thea where she was killed, Peleus, the first Starborn prince, and High King Theon's High General, took the horn as well as the Star Sword and started crafting his own story. That's a whole other topic, though, that I'm not going to get into right now. Ultimately, the horn broke. The Fae and the Asteri tried to renew it through magic and spells, but no luck. It was then given a place of honor in the Asteri archives before it was transferred to Lunathian, Luna's temple, after the city's establishment. Danica stole the horn, ground it up into powder, and had it tattooed to Bryce Quinlan's back with witch ink. This made Bryce unknowingly the bearer of the horn, and because she is Starborn Fae, she is the only one who can wield the horn.
Wait, pause. Hold on. Because if she's Starborn Fae, then if also the Archeron sisters are Starborn Fae, specifically Nesta, that would also be another reason why she can wield all three objects and live to tell the tale, in addition to being such a powerful maid person. Or is that stretching?
It's confusing.
Keep going.
This gave me quite the headache. Let's just leave it at that. All right, let's talk more about the Dread Trove history. Fionn and Thea spearheaded the defeat of the Daglin, using their own weapons against them. Now, of course, this does include Truth Teller and the Star Sword, but it also includes the Dread Trove items. Thea found them where they were hidden under Ramiel, and then she took them, and then they partly used those to defeat the Daglin. Then, after defeating High King Fionn, Thea took the Trove for herself, and then she became High Queen of Prythian, and she had unchecked limitless power. But she wanted more than what the Fae homeland could offer. So I'm assuming she hid the mask and the crown before departing with the harp and the horn. That is why it was last known to be on Prythian, because she hid them in Prythian. Fast forward to Seline returning with the harp. Of course, she is the one who hid the harp in the prison. Once on Midgard, we find out that the Asteri have been looking for the Dread Trove. They are on a mission to find the Dread Trove. In fact, even in present day, before the Asteri are killed or sucked into the black hole, whatever you want to call that, before Bryce defeats the Asteri, they have been looking for this homeland because they want that Dread Trove back. So when Seline returned back to the homeland with the harp, of course, she is the one who hid the harp in the prison. I'm not going to get into all of that quite yet. We will be going to the prison in a later episode, so I'll put a pin in that with all the harp and prison stuff there.
I was listening to the prison part of the book just like this morning or like even last night, and I swear to God, I felt like I was going on a trip. Like once you know all the Maasverse connections, and then there's the people like banging in the walls and all this, it's just it's so good. But we're not there yet. However, like Lexi mentioned during the surreal part of the ACOTAR part of the episode regarding the mask, it is mentioned how no one can take on and off the mask and live to tell the tale except for Nesta. However, we know two other people who also can take the mask on and off. Bryce, who has the maid object tattooed on her back, is able to wear the mask and take it off without any repercussions. But so is Hunt, who is able to slip the mask on and off, and he slips the mask on to escape death in the final battle. But yes, putting on the mask is very painful. It basically rips his soul apart, but he is able to take it off, or it actually kind of falls off, and live to tell the tale. Because Bryce and Hunt have magical maid sex the night before, and therefore Hunt is maid.
So the way that I see it is because we know that the harp can transport magic from one person to another. For instance, that is how Thea transported her raw Starborn magic into both of her daughters. I think that maybe that's not necessarily only a harp thing, but it is something that the horn gives Bryce that ability to do as well. And I also have a new theory that I had called you about yesterday, and we'll get into this more later because I'm still processing through all of it. But maybe Nesta is, I'll call it the chosen Starborn, because when she was made, the cauldron transferred that magic really up front and center for her versus it being diluted through thousands of years of ancestry.
Yes. Oh, God. We need to stop or else I'm going to just break out in hives.
Maasverse is getting really hard because like these could be their own episodes and we can't let them be their own episodes. Maybe someday, but not right now. Okay, friends, we are officially entering our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode where we call out series crossover references and discuss theories. Today, we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from the entire Maasverse. So please only continue listening if you've read all the books in both Throne of Glass and Crescent City. Let's continue with our part 2 of Serial Tea Time regarding the Bog of Urid, because some major historical events happened here. But first, we know from Seline's download that after Thea and Theon defeated the Daglin and ruled as High King and Queen, Theon wanted to pass the crown after his passing to their eldest daughter Helena instead of his wife Thea, because he didn't believe she was a worthy successor and he thought it was time to let the next generation rule after he was gone. Well, Thea and her general, soon-to-be lover Peleus, did not like High King Theon's decision and made plans to overthrow him, which brings us back to the Bog of Urid. It used to be the Daglin's private game park where they crafted terrible monsters to serve as worthy prey. That's what I think the Kelpie was created for. While Theon, Thea, and Peleus were hunting in the bog, a Kelpie dragged a bound and gagged Theon into the water's inky depths. Quote, the once proud king screaming as he went under. And Thea and Peleus just let it happen, watching impassively. I'm also guessing they were the ones who bound and gagged him in the first place. Then Thea summoned Gwydion / the Star Sword, which was Theon's cauldron-made sword, and Truth Teller, its twin, which had been his dear friend Anlas's, who died in the war, from the waters where they had been dragged down on Theon's person. And when she held the sword and dagger, starlight flared from Thea as well as the blades glowed with their own starlight, reacting to the Starborn power. This empowered Thea to become the ruling High Queen, now in possession of the 4 objects of the trove and both sword and dagger. So why is all of this important and applicable to the bog in the present day? Number 1, the bog is described as, quote, dead trees, gray with age and weather, jutted like the broken lances of 1,000 soldiers, some draped with curtains of moss. No leaves clung to their branches. Before Theon was dragged underwater by the Kelpie, maybe this Kelpie that Nesta slays, this land was lush with grass and trees in bloom. But the moment he died, literally the moment he died, petals began falling from the trees, and it was as if the land died with its king. So here we are more than 15,000 years later, seeing this dead land still mourning the loss of its king. Number 2, in the Bog of Urid, Nesta sees soldiers in ancient armor and, quote, judging by their fine armor, they were warriors and kings and princes and lords.
So we have to wonder if these were Theon's men. Like this, I read that and I was like,
I read that too, and we know according to legend, this land used to be sacred, so could they have been laid to rest here along with their weapons as a final honor well before the king was killed? Or maybe a battle against the Daglin took place here. There's thousands of soldiers, so I don't think it was only from this one hunting excursion.
Yes, I love the idea that this is one of the battles against the Daglin, and that's where this took place, especially given the number. In Seline's download, it's also only mentioned that Theon, Thea, and Peleus are here. But based on this description, it feels way too on the nose not to be a Theon nod. There's also the first soldier who stands up and like helps Nesta against the Kelpie. In my head canon, that is Theon.
It could be personal revenge against the Kelpie because he was also killed by the Kelpie.
Oh my god, that's so good!
Also, we do know that after the Daglin were defeated, that the land really came alive again without them literally feeding off of its magic and all of the people's magic too. So maybe that's what really brought this land back up. And after High King Theon was defeated and killed, he was somehow tethered to this magic of the land or something along those lines. I don't know exactly, but just some fun speculation there.
Because Theon and Thea ruled for, and I think it's described as a millennia after they defeated the Daglin. So that is entirely possible. Yes.
And then she ruled for another millennia after he was defeated. Yes. While the inner circle doesn't know how the mask ended up here, my guess is that Thea was inspired by the location of Fion's downfall, and she came back here to hide the mask before she went to Midgard, especially now that it seems cursed and the land is dying. She's like, nobody else is going to come here. This is a great place to hide the mask.
We've also heard of another Kelpie in House of Earth and Blood. It's a little less than 1 year before the start of our story. Bryce tried to convince Jessica on Lahaba's behalf to get some iris eels to brighten up the space. Instead, she got a Kelpie, quote, that had humped the glass with all the finesse of a wasted college guy. God damn it, I love Crescent City. Later in the book, Jessica brings in a knock, which in Celine's download when they're in the Bog of Urid part and she's showing all of that, they see a Kelpie, and Bryce notes how it looks like a relative of the knock.
Speaking of the Kelpie, it speaks a 15,000-year-old language, as we were talking about, one that Rhys and Amryn know, which is how they will communicate with Bryce before she takes the magic bean. Rhys only understands every other word here, but he communicates pretty well with Bryce, so he must have brushed up on his Babel app in between diaper changes.
Taking a bit of a pivot, this is also not the first time in the Maasverse that we've seen silver fire. I have been waiting to talk about this. In Empire of Storms, when Deanna possesses Aelin at Skull's Bay, quote, cold white light, tendrils flickered, silver flame. And that's when it dawns on Rowan that this is not the wildfire she's about to unleash, but moonfire. So cold it burned, quote, the cold of the stars, the cold of stolen light. I love the stars, like kind of a tie into the Night Court. Stolen light. Stolen, I always just associate with Nesta. I don't think that this means necessarily that Nesta is a descendant of Deanna, but a comment on a Reddit post, snarf, snarf, snark, mentions, I say that 5 times fast.
That sounds like a South Park reference. Like
it might be.
No, like it is actually.
Oh. Mentions how it could be because the cauldron's power is that of the gods' power. So Deanna's power was utilized in the cauldron, or one with the cauldron, part of the cauldron, and that's one of the parts that Nesta took. I also couldn't help but notice that Deanna is also known as Lady of the Hunt. Could this be tied with the Wild Hunt? I have no idea. Some people also wonder if Deanna is Nesta in a different timeline. To be quite honest, I don't know how that would work unless Tog is way in the future, which wouldn't really line up with what we know about shifters and Hofas and all of that.
Oh yeah, I don't, because then Aelin falls through the Akatar world and Rhys slows her down, which is this winter solstice in our story that we'll be coming to here shortly. So I think that the whole time jump things, like we already got realm worlds. I think it's all on the same timeline.
I agree. And yeah. I think personally, I love this idea that Nesta and Deanna are tied somehow, but I do think that it is just similar powers and a fun nod to the similarities in these different universes.
I want to pull out this quick little nod of foreshadowing between Azriel and Nesta in House of Flame and Shadow. In chapter 32 of Silver Flames, Nesta thinks how the two of them could be allies. And it would be so cool to see their friendship and camaraderie on the page months later in House of Flame and Shadow.
I love Nesta and Azriel in House of Flame and Shadow. Like Brett and I just got to Caves Part 1 and oh my God, I love them so much.
Me too. It's also, again, so hard to not act like House of Flame and Shadow is quite a full-blown sequel after Silver Flames, because otherwise we'd have a whole other episode here in Maasverse Madness. So I just wanted to pull out that one little one.
Earlier how I was like, yeah, I don't think Nesta's powers are gone. We know they're not gone.
Yeah, we know that they're not gone. Yes.
The dungeons of the Hewn City. While in the interrogation room with the 2 surviving soldiers, we learn that whatever remains of the bodies that Azriel is working on, it goes through the hatches in the center of the room, which leads to a pit of beasts below. We will become so familiar with this in House of Flame and Shadow when Bryce is stuck in that same room, or at least a room like it, and opens the grate to winnow down to the beasts who do not attack her. And this does lead to her, again, part 1 of Cave's conquest. Also, in that interrogation room, guilt and shame cloud Rhys's eyes because of how Feyre feels with the way that they're treating these soldiers who are not in their right minds. I think that this is the moment, and maybe possibly others like it stacked on top of this, that was the real turning point for Rhys using his powers with prisoners more sparingly, and why he didn't look into Bryce's mind and instead asks for permission at the beginning of House of Flame and Shadow. And of course, Bryce shot him down. I am still team, if someone dropped from the sky and was claiming that these evil things called Asteri had it out for my planet, I would definitely do some mind sleuthing, but that's just me.
I will say, I also do think that she came from a place of good intentions. Like, she wasn't, I'll call it a bad guy, at least as far as they knew. Like, the jury was still out. And so he didn't want to initially jump to those conclusions of treating her like a prisoner. It's more of treating her like we don't know what to do with you yet. Let's figure this out here.
So they put her in a dungeon with a grate with beasts below it that growled at her when she threw peas
But you know what I mean. Like, she's like just wanting help. She's asking for help. She's not trying to kill anybody. She's an anomaly that they don't know what to do with her versus her being a bad guy.
But she hasn't stolen Azriel's emotional support dagger yet, and that
no, of course not. Yeah. Today we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from all 3 Crescent City books, as well as Empire of Storms from Throne of Glass. So please only continue listening if you've read all of those books. All right, I'm so excited to keep talking about Pegasus here. The legend about them originating from the island of the prison is correct. When the territory was the lush islands of the Dusk Court and ruled by Queen Thea, her winged horses soared among the clouds. The magic of the land, as we know the territories have, nourished the Pegasuses to thrive in their natural habitat. And the sky literally did devour most of these winged horses because Thea brought them when they opened the realm portal and went to Midgard.
We also know from Seline's download that Thea rode them into the battle on Midgard.
Yes, and in the Prince of Caves, there are carvings of the Pegasuses being slaughtered. I believe most of these creatures died during that big final battle, and the few that survived ended up in Avalon, which makes sense that they ended up with Helena and Peleus, because he became the first Starborn Prince of Midgard, and I think he also ruled over Avalon, because that's where he was buried with the Star Sword. However, after the Asteri were defeated, 24 Pegasuses appeared in Avalon after Rhys frees the land. It's like they sprang out of the earth, like they were hibernating or hiding there for all those thousands of years. Rhys will wonder if Helena somehow kept them secretly alive, waiting until it was safe to appear again. The land of Avalon yielded its lush green lands, holding the power as it was bid until someone with the Star Sword and Truth Teller came to unlock it at the 8-pointed star mark. When Seline returned to the Fae homeland and corrupted the land that was once her mother's Dusk Court, imprisoning evil monsters that caused the islands to shrivel and the earth become barren, I wonder if that's when they went to the Day Court. And it makes me also wonder if there's like a Day Court connection to the magic of the Dusk Court that the Pegasus are drawn to, even if their numbers are dwindling because the natural source that once helped them thrive is gone. All of this to say, what if Nesta does something similar to the prison territory with freeing the land? I know it's barren for different reasons than Avalon, with Seline putting the monsters in the prison, but I could see Nesta freeing the land in a similar fashion. And maybe the Pegasuses will return to their homeland, and Nesta will fly off into the sunset on her winged horse with her Batboy by her side.
Woo! Let's do another thing that we learned from this big old Seline download, and that is about Gwydion. We get the long lost sword Gwydion mentioned in this stretch.
It is so hard not to do a full serial tea time here on Gwydion / a Star Sword. It would be its own mini episode. I pretty much just did one for the Pegasuses, but you know what? I'm going to go dive into this anyway. After Thea and Peleus ensured Theon died by Kelpie in the Bog of Urid that we learned all about last episode, scaled hands from within the water thrust Gwydion and Truth Teller out of the pool. Thea summoned both blades to her, and when she snatched them, starlight flared from Thea. Gwydion and Truth Teller answered to Thea because she helped make them. They answered to the call in her blood, to her very power, to her Starborn power. With Gwydion, Truth Teller, and the Dread Trove, she ruled with unchecked power as High Queen. Amren believes Gwydion disappeared around the same time as the last of the Dread Trove objects, which, correct, it did, because Thea took it with her on the crossing to Midgard.
After Thea came over to Midgard with the sword, she left it with Helena when she transferred some of her power into both of her daughters.
And Helena, with Gwydion and the horn, didn't make it back to Midgard with Seline, who was in possession of Truth Teller and the harp. Peleus, unfortunately, ended up taking Helene and forcing her to be his wife. He also took Gwydion for himself, and I assume he renamed it as the Star Sword. But according to Adis, the Star Sword was supposed to go only to Thea's female heirs. I think that's why Rhys is ultimately the owner of the Star Sword, and it makes sense for the setup that she ends up giving it to Nesta, who may also be a descendant too. As the first prince of the Starborn in Midgard, Peleus Buttface was buried with the Star Sword in the Cave of Princes. Since females were not allowed in the Cave of Princes, there was no opportunity for a female heir to attempt to reclaim it. And yes, it seems like that was a rule about the cave on purpose, so a female heir wouldn't have the chance. Luckily though, Rune ended up retrieving it. I figure fate knew he would willingly give it to his sister, the female heir of Thea. Okay, sorry, this is getting longer than I meant. So real quick, the Star Sword / Guiding can defeat death, which definitely makes sense because it was made by the cauldron and can kill the unkillable. The Autumn King avoids touching it, and I have to wonder if it's for a similar reason that Rhys and the Bat Boys don't touch Nesta's made weapons here. In Midgard, there is a Fae prophecy which says, quote, "When knife and sword are reunited, so shall our people be," referring to both the Star Sword and its twin Truth Teller. So when Bryce reunites them when she travels to the Fae homeland with the Star Sword, she's fulfilling the multi-meaning prophecy, which I know we've talked about in a different Maasverse Madness, so I'll stop here. I love how this is one of the objects that connects these worlds, and Silver Flames just has so many Easter eggs. Last thing to note, I promise. Bryce gives Nesta the Star Sword and tells her to go figure out why she has an 8-pointed star tattooed on her back. Again, tying Nesta to the Starborn and the Dust Court, and now she has 2 made great swords. Holy shit.
Brava SJM and brava Lexi for pulling that. Let's do some rapid fires now.
Helion thinks one of his ancestors tried to wear the mask before, but as far as we know, the mask was hidden by Thea before departing for Midgard, hence why it was lost to history. At least that lines up with the timeline we have, although we could be wrong. There's never any mention that she hid the mask and crown. That is simply an assumption. And before Thea, the mask was in the Asteri's possession. So is there something more to Helion having such a reaction to the mask's power? Maybe it's connected to why the Pegasuses went to the Day Court, like I was mentioning earlier. Like there's a tie between the Dusk and Day Court. And the mask is warning the High Lord of Day not to mess with the mask, which was wielded by the High Queen of the Dusk Court, and it's warning like not to be corrupt like her. Yeah, I realize that's a stretch, but I'm still pointing it out.
One thing I want to add to the Valkyrie Kings mentioned. So the Valkyries in Norse mythology are connected to, in addition to Odin, the main god in Norse mythology, they're also connected to the land of Hel, spelled the exact same as Crescent City, Hel, H-E-L, as one of the 5 possible locations for the dead to go. I'm massively summarizing that. If you're a Norse mythology person, I know I'm leaving a lot out. Please don't at me. I know. So here's my crack theory. What if one of the princes of Hel is the old king? You mentioned earlier it has to be someone less than 500 years, but we do know that Thanatos exists somewhere on Prithian, so maybe that's my guess. What if it's Thanatos? When the Bat Boys unsheathed the weapons, the great sword, quote, truly glowed like moonlight lay within the metal. After last episode with bringing up Deanna's possession of Aelin in Skull's Bay, and we know that that was Moonfire, I wonder if this Moonfire is at another parallel to the Silverfire being Moonlight?
Oh, I see. I was going to say it's a nod to Nesta's Starborn power. Moonlight, starlight, feels similar. I'm also so riding hard on this Starborn train here too. On the note, speaking of which, of Starborn power and these weapons, I will say Rhys is of Starborn lineage. So theoretically, he should be able to wield these weapons if we're talking about it in the sense of Starborn power. So maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the Starborn power then.
So are you backtracking for yourself?
Just throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall. It's Maasverse. There's no rules in this section.
Last but not least, fucking when you're made. This is such a small thing, but Amren's quote, "I'd be careful when you're fucking her," to Cassian is kind of a valid warning. I know I ripped into Amren so hard this episode, so here's something that she did right. Because technically that's what happened when Bryce transferred some power into Hunt, allowing him then to wield the mask. He was temporarily made with a capital M. So with how much Cassian and Nesta fuck, I'm guessing there's a lot of made points stacked up within Cassian.
Today we are discussing concepts and lore that give spoilers from the entire Maasverse. So please only continue listening if you've read all of the SJM books. Okay, everybody, they're gone, right? Can you tell how blue in the face we were not being able to talk about all of the Crescent City tie-ins to this part of the book? Like at this point for today's Maasverse, just read Crescent City 3. There, yes. There's your Maasverse madness.
Seline download.
Yeah, just read the Seline download. Oh, speaking of which, let's kick off this ridiculously long Maasverse madness with our Surreal Tea Time Part 2 on the Daglin. And I'm just trying not to do like an entire Crescent City Surreal Tea Time. I don't know what their equivalent would be. Maybe like Jessica's Library or something.
Oh, that's good. Library of Parthos, if you will.
Yes, the Library of Parthos. But no, we're not doing that. This is
We're not
still staying
doing
within
it.
ACOTAR. All right, so who are the Daglin really? They are the Asteri.
No!
Who conquer worlds and feed off the magic and lives of the citizens. Basically, they're parasites. They're tens of thousands of years old at the minimum, taking immortal to a whole new level of truly immortal. They're also able to survive long periods of time without breathing, eating, or drinking, as we saw with Thea's punishment for Vesperus, trapped beneath the prison for more than 15,000 years. Though the description of Daglin in their true form remains unknown, it is widely speculated that their true forms are an extreme form of raw power forged from stars that inhabit whatever bodies they possess. Rhys describes the Asteri as being made of light. The Asteri claim that their great powers are from holy stars inside themselves, and they can physically manipulate things with its light. By the way, Asteri means star in Greek. The Asteri can kill and destroy with their power. I feel like with being all-powerful beings, that goes without saying. But we learn that their current power originates from both the first light and second light of Midgard's inhabitants. Thus, the Asteri feed off the population and use that power instead of their own. A quick history about the Asteri. The Asteri claim to have forgotten the location of their original homeworld, but we know from Vesperus that was once green and plentiful, except it grew to be too populous, wars broke out, and rivers ran dry.
I also want to point out that the bone carver says, quote, "Where we came from, ... I do not believe it is now anything more than dust drifting across a plain. There is no home to return to, none that I desire." That sounds a whole lot like what Vesperus said. I am still team death gods equal Asteri light. I'm going to say they all come from the same world. We also know that almost every death god we've encountered has black blood. Weaver, Lanthus, I guess the Suriel too was a death god. So what does this mean? When we're looking at Volg, because Volg is immediately what we associate with black blood, I look at the death gods like Lanthus, Bone Carver as almost like Volg princes / princesses, and the Asteri are the evolved Volg kings and queens, because Volg and Vesperus both had black blood.
Yes. So anyway, on their home planet, this world's brightest minds found ways to bend the fabrics of worlds and travel between them. They called themselves wayfinders or world walkers. So they left their destroying planet to find life elsewhere in the universe. However, once they left their home world, the Asteri's powers started to dim. They were dependent on their land's inherent magic, and magic on other worlds wasn't potent enough. But they realized this too late, and they couldn't find a way back home. So they had to figure out ways to amplify their powers with the magic of the land. For instance, in the Fae homeworld, that's where they pooled their power together and imbued the gifts of the land into the cauldron so it would work to their will. They warped it, turning it into something deadlier, no longer just a tool of creation, but of destruction. They have records of their conquests going back millennia. Due to their need to survive and thrive off others, the Asteri have spent eons traveling from world to world, conquering and farming off the life forces of other races they deemed sustainable, and destroying any that rebelled. They give many worlds kill switches to protect their interests. However, during their conquests, only 3 worlds have been documented as successfully driving the Asteri out, including the Fae homeworld and Hell. Okay, so let's go back to the Asteri's reign in the Fae homeworld. They ruled over the Fae for 5,000 years, and the Fae ruled over the humans in the lands the Daglin allowed them to govern. Any attempt at rebellion was quashed before forces could be rallied. The Daglin were just too powerful. The Fae were forced to make the tithe to the Daglin once a year, to offer up kernels of the Fae's power in tribute to their true masters. This was to fuel their own power, remember they feed off others' powers, and to limit the Fae's power. I'm assuming even though the Fae were forced to participate, technically they had to offer up this kernel of power. The Asteri hid pockets of their power throughout the lands in case their enslaved Fae should cause problems. Some of these pockets of power are likely beneath sacred mountains at their very roots. The magic draws all sorts of creatures. Not the fuzzy nice kind, but like the Midgard worm kind. Or perhaps even the crazy beasts over by Ramiel as well. Wouldn't that be interesting? There are certain places that are better suited to hold power than others, like where the veil between worlds is thin and magic naturally abounds. Mist around an environment are proof of somewhere being a thin place, like the prison territory, and every world has at least one thin place. The Asteri thrived here with magic naturally abound and the cauldron in their possession. Now, earlier I was talking about how they might have made the Book of Breathings, and I do believe that they did, because the language that it is written in is the same language of what is on Bryce's back. And that is what Amren says has not been spoken in 15,000 years, and it is what Rhys did not know about too. So that would have to be the Asteri's language, like what Ataraxia is from, is of the Fae's old language. With the cauldron in their possession, the Asteri made the trove, though kept the 4 items hidden under Ramiel and squabbled over who would use them. So basically no one ended up using them. Which brings us to their downfall. Over the millennia, the Daglan became arrogant in their unending dominion of this world, but their overconfidence blinded them to the force like none other that was gathering in secret. Thea ended up stealing the Dread Trove to use it to their advantage. Yet Thea and Fionn and the other Fae rebels knew they needed to use the most valuable weapon of all, the cauldron, which was located at the base of Ramiel. Next thing we know, Fionn is pulling Gwydion out of the cauldron, and they used these weapons against the Daglan to defeat them, destroy them, or send them off to another realm. But the surviving Asteri want to take back the Fae homeworld, which they believe to be rightfully theirs. So remember how I mentioned Anelius fought against the Daglan soldiers at the base of Ramiel? I think he held the line because they needed to guard the cauldron. So somehow they got access to the cauldron at the base of Ramiel, and he was the one who was guarding it. And that is why the pass is named in his honor.
Oh, that's good.
I felt really proud of myself for making that connection.
That is really good.
Let's round this out with how the Daglan / Asteri rule differently on Midgard. And I'm going to use present tense here, even though we all know what happens at the end of Crescent City, because you've read it, right? Right? Because it seemed like the Asteri learned their lesson with Midgard. Blatant oppression, like on the Fae homeworld, led to revolution. In Midgard, they masked their oppression through the illusion of freedom and a twisted form of democracy. More than 15,000 years ago, after they were defeated by Fionn, the Asteri arrived on Midgard and began to lure other races from different worlds as a means to feed off of them. This included the Fae, shifters, and other Vanir. For instance, the shifter Fae from the Tog world. Oh my god, look how it's all coming together. The Asteri's propaganda is that they were liberators and enlighteners. According to them, the Asteri chose Midgard as the place to begin creating a perfect empire, and creatures and races from other worlds soon came to Midgard through the Northern Rift. But what none of these other species knew is that the Asteri put parasites in the water to weaken everyone else's magic. The Asteri created the hierarchies of the Vanir and made up a ritual called the Drop to harvest the power of the magical creatures of Midgard. These Vanir are required to hand over their first light upon reaching immortality. It's essentially a tax on their magic, but more importantly, food for the Asteri. And there you go. I apologize if I forgot something. That
Be
was
good
a lot.
to her, please.
There you go. The Daglan reign.
Wow. Honestly, props to SJM for creating this. Like, I know that there's Cauldron Boil Me's, but like that's an achievement. Wow.
I remember reading Crescent City 3, specifically the Seline download. And no, you know what? Even Crescent City 2, when Bryce went into the Dusk Room, and it was just like, there were so many things that were just unfolding, and it was so exciting to be connecting all of these dots. And it is just so cool with how we're able to bring it all together. And I can't tell you all how difficult it is to separate this ACOTAR only part from the rest of everything else, because we know so much more.
Well,
let's get into that. Yes. Okay, so quick behind the scenes. Not talking about what we actually know about the Harp's flashback and the people trying to get through was one of the hardest things that we had to do on an episode. I think that was the first time I've ever pretend theorized, which was basically me just asking a million questions.
I wouldn't even say pretend. You asked all the questions we had until we read Crescent City 3.
Yes.
We know from Celine's download that when she ran back to Prythian, she chose to survive instead of stay on Midgard and fight alongside her sister and her mother. To be fair, also Helena was on her way up into the Prythian portal, and then she chose to stay back and fight with her mother. But anyway, in choosing survival, Seline had to shut the door to Midgard behind her, locking out an untold amount of people and trapping them in Midgard, which ? We'll get to that in a second. In Nesta's vision / flashbacks in the prison here, she sees them as their way back is forever sealed. So are they like floating in the in-between, or were they actually still on Midgard and are now super dead thanks to Thea and her daughters?
That was definitely my understanding understanding because of how desperate they were with the enemy coming. And the way that it's described with that opening of the worlds, it feels very much like a door. So that's my understanding. Yes.
That's what I figured. I didn't know if they were like floating around in the black hole, like where the Asteri are, like the place in between worlds, if you will. But that makes a lot more sense. Nesta thinks how someone, quote, very wicked used the harp blast. She ain't wrong. And Selene's download obviously has some very interesting choices that Bryce is very vocal about. While I wouldn't call Seline truly evil, though, she made some very complex choices that were inherently very selfish.
It also feels rather full circle that Nesta is present during Selene's download and finds out exactly what happened from her flashback. So during Selene's download, Nesta and Bryce are pretty much on the same team where it's like, you suck, bitch.
Yep.
And Nesta has her own reasons why as well from all of this that happens in Silver Flames.
Well, also, if she's also a descendant from Seline and the Thea line, then her and Bryce have even more in common, considering they're both descendants of that Starborn power. But we got to talk about this prison chamber, because we learn in Hofast that the constellations on the floor in the prison chamber are actually the constellations of Midgard. And right after Seline closed the gate, again, on many, many, many people, she sat in this chamber with nothing but the 8-pointed star on it, and she set the harp on top of it right before she started carving the constellations of the world she abandoned. I also wonder if the reason that Nesta alone can step through the wards, other than being made, is if she is a descendant of Seline. We know that Seline keyed her son, the one that glows with starlight, his blood into the prison, making it so that only their bloodline can control the wards of the prison. If Nesta is a descendant, this is her bloodline. So no wonder she alone was able to walk through the wards. Rapid fire, because this Maasverse madness is probably, I think, the longest we've ever done. I think so.
Honestly, we were even literally talking about it being its own episode.
Yes. At the lake, as Cassian is watching Nesta practice swordplay, he thinks, quote, like that 8-pointed star was stamped on her very heart. This line cannot be an accident, especially because just a few chapters later, it mentions how she was brought to the chamber with an 8-pointed star for a reason. Like, the more and more we deep dive this book, the more and more I'm like, yeah, Nesta's going to resurrect the Dust Court. Absolutely. I will say, however, I was listening to Crescent City 3 on a road trip recently with my husband, and when Bryce resurrects Avalon, she basically uses the magic of Thea to unlock the earth and bring life back into it. So there's a lot of assumption that, oh, well, Nesta's going to do that with the Dust Court. But what does Elaine love to do? Garden. What if she has her gardening love and ability to like bring things to life because she is also a descendant of that same power? So maybe she and the Archeron sisters together are going to be what is able to resurrect the Dust Court. I don't know. I got a little on my little crazy high horse. Another rapid fire.
The 3 pieces of the starlight. I mean, I think that's going to stretch too far, but
hold on. Wait, because you just said, because with Bryce, she had to use the 3 pieces of Thea in order to unlock a, no. The third
she
piece
also
was
needed
Avalon.
to use Gwydion and Truth Teller as well. She used the Star Sword and Truth Teller.
Which are now back
to
on
unlock
Prythian.
it, which are both now on Prythian. Yes. And take this great sword and figure out what to do about that 8-pointed star. Yeah. I think Nesta's going to go back to this exact location here in the prison, and I think that there might be something, like a key.
Like a key. Yes, exactly. Like exactly how it was on Avalon in order to.
Now, what the hell that means for these monsters, I have no idea.
Oh.
But bring the Pegasus is back. I'm telling you, Nesta is going to ride off into the sunset on a Pegasus with her beautiful bat boy flying next to her.
Maybe Blue Anus is just going to be buried in the sand, just like the Autumn King was when Avalon. I mean, I know he was dead already, but still. Maybe they'll just be trapped below. It's Anus. I know it is, but no, it's Anus. What is it? Oh my God, I have 2 more. Okay. During the Wild Hunt mention, Lanthus says how they had hounds, and Rhys later says that they don't look like any kind of hounds they're used to today. And Nesta notes how these hounds look a lot like the hounds of the Hewn City. From ACOSF, the descriptions of the beasts of the Hewn City look like, quote, great scaled black beasts were carved into these gates, all coiled together, all in a nest of claws and fangs, sleeping and fighting, some locked in endless cycle of devouring each other. Now, some people wonder if this is a version of word hounds, although I wonder because because the description matches more that of the Ilkin, just without the wings, much like Rhys's form. No matter what, I'm 100% positive that this is a crossover mix hint, but I don't think it's a one-to-one comparison. Kind of like how the Volg and the Asteri we think are like evolved versions of each other. In the bonus chapter with Nesta, Azriel, and Rhys, where the latter plays the music on her phone and Nesta loves it, Azriel loves it, it's great, and Nesta is baffled when she learns all of the different kinds of music and how many songs such a small device can hold. I just love that small tidbit of information and how much each of the SJM women has a passion for the arts. It's just so great. And last but not least, we can't not mention the fourth object in Lanthus's vision, made out of ancient bone. Of course, it is Luna's horn that is now tattooed on Bryce's back.
And it seems like it's veiled in shadow, I believe, because it's worlds away that they're not able to truly see it. Yes, exactly.
All right. I have only two very small ones, actually, this episode, which was a relief after last week, which was meaty. During Cassian and Nesta's mating, I was on the hunt for any star language. Because if you remember in chapter 55 in our coverage, I found so much Starborn language, glowing like a star, flaring like a star, from when Feyre and Rhys's mating bond is solidified. So if you want to listen to that episode, it is episode 9 of our ACOMAF coverage. But the only thing that I could find in this scene was when Nesta talks about the threads glowing between them, quote, life glowed like starfire, and she had never seen anything more beautiful. There's a lot of glowing language, but it's all around the threads and their bonding together. So I do think that that is definitely more what it's leaning towards, but the starfire feels very on the nose. And all of this star language is leaning me further and further down my hill that I'm already willing to die on, that the Archerons are descendants from the Starborn Fae, aka Fea's line in Prithian. And then, last but not least, when I was reading the bonus chapter of Crescent City 3 with Nesta, Azriel, and Rhys all listening to music on Bryce's phone, all I could think about was when Nesta goes back to Cassian and she's telling him all about this, magical device where there's thousands of songs on it, and he's just like, fuck you, Bryce. Show up my Symphonia. That's all I can think of.
Me too. All right, friends, that is it for today. Next week, we are covering chapters 60 through 64 of Silver Flames. We're really getting into the home stretch here. And of course, like we mentioned, we will have an episode releasing this Thursday all about Azriel's bonus chapter that has the fandom going, oh my God. And yes, we will be talking a whole lot more about the famous ship battles. Is he going to end up with Elaine or Gwen? Today, we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from the entire Maasverse. So please only continue listening if you've read all 16 books.
Okay, you're probably gone if you have not read these. We need to talk about some things that we couldn't mention during the whole Sacred Mountain underneath Ramiel segment. Because I mentioned, what if Anlas is buried underneath? We know that Seline, underneath the prison, carved the full story of the fall of the Dust Court, and then she had her holographic download moment. Are we going to get another one of those with Anlas under Ramiel? And then would there be another one under the Sacred Mountain in the middle? Since it's in the middle, would it be from Fionn? Probably not, because he died in the Bog of Urid. So I could see that one just being left alone because we already spent so much time under that mountain. But also Cassian mentioned he hardly would call the prison a palace. But it used to be. I couldn't say that. And that was hard. That was hard not to say.
We also can't forget about what Vesperus said about hiding pockets of the Asteri's power throughout the lands, specifically under the Sacred Mountains. There is absolutely a reason they're all barren, and I wonder if it has to do with the Asteri magic, where it's corrupted the mountains from what has taken root beneath them, or the Asteri's magic has somehow continued feeding off these locations, causing them to be the only 3 barren mountains. These places of hidden magic are better suited to hold power than other locations, where the veil between worlds is thin and magic naturally abounds. The Asteri's magic thrives in regenerative magic of the land. While Vesperus goes on to discuss thin places in particular, I am so hung up on this about the Sacred Mountains, and Ramiel seems to be the only one that hasn't been explored whatsoever. We'll save more theories about what's under Ramiel until next week's episode, where we are going to be talking a lot more about Ramiel, but I just love it all.
We also finally have made it to, I'd argue, our biggest Throne of Glass ACOTAR crossover.
Oh, absolutely. I'd say the only direct one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
This is the Starfall, where Aelin flies across the sky. In case you forgot this part of Kingdom of Ash, allow me to refresh your memory. Towards the very end of the book, where Aelin leaps through the gate and flies through the worlds, she falls through Lunathian, quote, a world where a great city had been built along the curve of a river, the buildings impossibly tall and glimmering with light. Hi, Lunathian! And then she passes into a world of snow-capped mountains with thousands of shining stars flying overhead. Quote, where a winged male stood beside a heavily pregnant female, gazing at those very stars. Hello, Rhys and Feyre from this Starfall. Aelin is unable to slow down, so she reaches out her hand to see if she can signal to them to help me. And Rhys's head snaps towards her, I'm assuming hearing her using Daemati powers, and he lifts out a hand, shooting a blast of dark power. Aelin realizes that this is a wall and a shield that slams into her that slows her down, and then she vanishes from the world just like that. It's less than a quarter of a page, but you can't read that and not totally freak out. Something I love is that Kingdom of Ash came out actually in October 2018, and Silver Flames came out in February 2021. For reference, though, ACOSF came out in May 2018, so a little bit before Kingdom of Ash. So she already knew that Feyre was going to be pregnant at Aelin flying across the sky at Starfall. This pregnancy Easter egg is just so fun that she already knew what was in store for Feyre in Silver Flames.
So does this mean that Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City are all in the same timeline? Because Aelin is falling through worlds, but not necessarily timelines, right? That's been my understanding, and it makes the most sense. Do you agree, Nicole?
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense.
Though if all the worlds are on the same timeline, it does squash a lot of theories about potential generational connections between universe characters. But I think that this really does show that they are all on the same timeline.
Well, something that would kind of make me go, huh? Is that if Flame and Shadow is about 6 months after this. So Aelin's 19? She's about to become the Queen of Terrasen officially with the end of the war and all that kind of stuff. Where is Lydia in this timeline then? Because we know Lydia is a descendant of Bran and Galathinius, but some people have assumed that it means that she's a descendant of Aelin and Rowan. I personally don't think so, because timeline-wise, that wouldn't add up.
Isn't Brandon from about 10,000 years ago or so?
Yes, so Brandon is from many, 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 many years ago.
So I could see a descendant of his going over to Midgard during the Northern Rift. So Lydia is an ancestor of his, but from thousands and thousands of years ago when his descendants migrated to Midgard.
Yes, one of the main reasons that people think Lydia is Aelin and Rowan's is because she has that ruby ring, which is similar to how Rowan's ring is described, but it's not a one-to-one comparison. So I agree with you. I think that she's a distant cousin of Aelin and
I agree. Today, we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from Crescent City 3, House of Flame and Shadow, and just a little world building reference from Throne of Glass. No plot spoilers there. So please only continue listening if you've read all of Crescent City, and however you feel about Throne of Glass spoilers. I'm not going to tell you about that one. First, a little more about Ramiel for our serial tea time that we learn from House of Flame and Shadow. In the caves beneath the prison, Nesta points out a carving of the cauldron perched on top of Ramiel with the 3 stars above it. And we learn from Seline's download that the Daglin apparently kept the cauldron at the base of the monolith at the top of Ramiel. So, you know how Annelius defended the pass to ensure the Daglin's forces couldn't get up Ramiel? I think he was making sure the Daglin couldn't get back to the cauldron. So the Fae forces had gained control of the cauldron, which the Daglin originally had control of the cauldron. And so Annelius was risking his life to protect the greatest asset of all. Perhaps the top of Ramiel is also the original location of the cauldron. In fact, also from Seline's download, we see a visual of Thea standing on top of Ramiel with Theon. So I think the made objects like Whitian were dipped into the cauldron from this location. I'm leaning toward the onyx monolith being made too, since legend says it has been around since before the Night Court. Well, all of this history went down well before the courts were established. And it was here too, maybe, that the Daglin warped the cauldron. Perhaps that is somehow connected to the sacred mountain being barren. We also know about the onyx monolith that it immediately heals anyone who touches it, as Emery and Gwen will tell us in the next episode, and it takes them to where they are needed most. Previously, we had thought that it just takes you to the camp. I'll just say kind of like to the Illyrian safety area, but they are taken to the river house. So I also think that maybe it wasn't only the cauldron that the Daglin needed to get up to the top for. Maybe they were wanting to get to the monolith so that they could transport to another realm, perhaps. One more thing here, because I can't stop talking about Ramiel. Vesperus also hints that the Asteri/Daglin hid pockets of their power beneath sacred mountains, which might also have to do with these mysterious tunnels and underground palaces too. Yes, I absolutely think so.
Yes.
Vesperus also says that their magic draw all sorts of creatures. So I am convinced that these ancient and cunning beasts gravitate toward Ramiel because of the Asteri's magic that is hiding within it. And the Asteri are these beasts' original creators.
There's a few other Ramiel theories that I want to throw out there as well. There are quite a number of theories. I couldn't find the original poster about this, but Ramiel is a possible entrance to hell. So maybe that's also why the Asteri were trying to get to the top, because they want to get to hell and really show Apollyon what's fucking up.
Possibly. That also makes sense with these beasts.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Oh my God. Yes, exactly. It's almost like how the Northern Rift connects Midgard to hell and other realms. This is almost like the Northern Rift of Prythian. So maybe Ramiel is also a thin place too. There's no mention of mist, at least that I found, but that might just be oversight. This also might be how Thanatos keeps getting in and out of the fucking world, because he is mentioned in Akabor how Thanatos' daughter is giving him, problems. This from Kier in the Court of Nightmares. But we know Thanatos is the Prince of the Ravine, aka the fourth Prince of Hell. Also, Orestes, one of the 3 stars on top of the mountain, is connected to the Greek god that is being chased down by Enris, aka Fury, aka Thanatos' daughter. I'm still so convinced that Fury is Thanatos' daughter, and then her.
Wow,
and
this is like a blast from the past with the theories. Man, we haven't talked about this in months.
I lay awake at night, literally saying Thanatos' daughter is Fury. Thanatos' daughter is Fury. I'm so convinced. Sierra Darling on Reddit also takes this a step further, wondering if Anlas is now one of the princes of hell too. We have 7 levels.
Wait,
7.
real quickly, because we also know that Anlas needed to get to the top of Ramiel and his guts were hanging out and that's where he died. Well, the Onyx monolith literally heals anybody who touches it. So maybe 2 options here. One is he tried to get to the top so that he could be healed and he did not make it, to actually touch it. Or he did touch it and he didn't actually die right there. And
he's just in hell.
And he's in hell. Now, this is also 15,000 years later, so I don't think an Illyrian would still be alive, but...
And Apollyon are still alive, and they were there 15,000 years ago with Thea.
True, but Anlas is an Illyrian.
True. But what if he's like an Illyrian plus? I don't know.
I mean, they do call him a warrior god, so...
Yeah, exactly. So we know that level 7 is the pit, aka Apollyon. We know that level 5 is the chasm, which is governed by Adis, with Thanatos right above him as level 4, the ravine. There are still levels 1 through 3 and then 4. This is the hollow, the trench, the canyon, and the abyss. Could Anlas be any of these princes? I tried to figure out if there was any that we could connect to like his name, and I couldn't find any. But there's also a theory that the monolith on top of Ramiel is a word gate. And this is why a lot of people think that you can literally touch it and then you're transported out of the blood, right? A la Portkey style. If that is the case, a huge part of ACOTAR 6 might be discovering this word gate, and it might be a possible way to connect to the Tog world again. I will never, ever, ever forget the fact that Rift Hold is called Rift Hold, like the Northern Rift. So maybe this is somehow to connect it to Dorian, and then Dorian's just going to come on top of Ramiel and be like, what's up, motherfuckers?
All right. Oh my gosh. We could literally go on and on and on about the top of Ramiel, what's underneath Ramiel, the Onyx monolith, all of this. Today, we are discussing concepts that give spoilers from all 3 Crescent City books. So please only continue listening if you've read through House of Flame and Shadow. I have a few more things to add to the Surreal Tea Time, and you know exactly what I'm about to say here. When Bryce reopens the portal to the House of Wind from Midgard after defeating the Asteri, she returns the mask and truth teller. You hear that, Nicole? She returns the emotional support dagger. We learn that Nesta's been in the doghouse since she gave Bryce the mask, but she also got to bond with Ember and get a glimpse into what love from a mother is like. Ember tells Nesta as they part, quote, "You'll find your way." I want to really quickly go back to what we were talking about with Nesta saying she doesn't want to rule the world. She only wants Cassian. And I do think that in the months between this, there is going to be some inner conflict of how that might not be enough. Maybe not for her, seeking the power, but her realizing she is destined for more, and it scares her. And going back to that self-discovery journey where she really does tap into that leadership quality that she does have deep down. And then, of course, the big kahuna. Bryce hands Gwydion / the Star Sword to Nesta and tells her, quote, "I think that 8-pointed star was tattooed on you for a reason. Take that sword and go figure out why." Let's fucking go! So yes, all in all, the 8-pointed star is extremely important. It is linked to Nesta, and she is destined to learn more about it. And it is impossible to be talking to all of you about ACOSF 6 predictions without including this Crescent City spoiler. And last thing to note, Rhys is an overprotective dad to baby Nyx, and I just absolutely love it. There.
That's the Rhysand that I miss. Like,
Yes.
Rhysand in Crescent City acts more like Rhysand from ACOTAR than ACOTAR Rhysand.
So some people do have an issue with how he pretty much put Nesta in the doghouse with, the whole mask thing. And people are really upset because they had such a beautiful ending here. And the way that I see it is they do still have their struggles with one another because their personalities are so different, but they are able to come together and be able to work around their issues. Yeah, Rhys, that is, to me, in character for him to be like, I'm sorry, you gave away a dread trove item to another realm? Like, come on, who would not be mad about that?
And a realm that has the Daglers who are trying to get back into Prythian. If I was Rhys, I'd be furious. Absolutely. I do also want to point out that there is a line when they're holding baby Nyx, and he's described as having, quote, blue eyes that already glowed with his father's and mother's starlight. And mothers. Yes, we know that Feyre has starlight. It's assumed that she got it from the day court. Possibly. Maybe. Who fucking knows?
Oh, see, I always understood it as her being the high lady of the night court and really leaning into that night star quality. Like, there's the magic of the night court for her.
I think that's what we're supposed to think. And I think the actualness of it is she is a descendant of Thea.
Oh, I 100% agree. I will die on that hill. Yes.
Yes, I think there are a few hills that I think we're willing to die on as we go into ACOTAR 6, and I'm sure we'll cover this in our next episode as we wrap up ACOTAR. The Archeron's descendant of Fae.
Yep.
That is a dying on a hill dramatic death that I will do. Speaking of Nyx, we get to see the beginning of Auntie Nesta and her love that she has for her nephew. As we know from Flame and Shadow, when Nesta has the mask on, it overpowers her, for lack of a better term. And no matter what Azriel says, it does not get through to her mind, so she can overrule the maid power and take it off. The House of Wind doesn't do it. Emery and Gwen don't do it. Feyre and Elaine, nope, no way. Even Cassian doesn't do it until, quote, Nyx is waiting too. And then the silver fire goes out and the mask falls to the floor. That is some big anti-energy right there. I love that. Speaking of the mask, though, Nesta mentions in this stretch how the trove needs to be kept far, far, far away from her. I'm assuming that something happens in the next 6-ish months, because we know that's the difference between the end of Silver Flames and when Bryce falls into Prythian, because Nesta does wield the mask when Bryce is in Prythian, when they're in the caves. And while it doesn't seem like she uses it regularly based on, Azriel's like, don't you dare, to Nesta in House of Flame and Shadow, it doesn't seem like it's the first time she's used it either.
That's interesting because I could read it both ways. One is where she knows what to do. She's worn it several times already, like we've seen here in this book, but it's not like it's a regular occurrence. Like, she just knows what to do because it is. Yeah, so I think it could be read either way, that it's the first time she's used it, possibly, a sense.
No matter what, I don't think it's like frequently where it's like every week, once a week, I talk to the dread.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like that. But I think it's like maybe once or twice it's been used. However, if the trove is being used, I say frequently, more than once in this 6 months, is that why it's harder for her to take it off?
I have an idea, but first I do want to say that this confirms that despite Nesta giving back most of her power to the cauldron, she can still wield the trove. I wonder if it was harder to take off because she doesn't have as much power than before.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
Yep.
And
That's
and
canon
one
for
more
me.
thing to mention too, as regards to like her tattoo and the bargain with the cauldron and all of that. The reason that we know that it is not the same 8-pointed star is because she says to Bryce, and I'm sorry I don't have this quote in front of me, but it's something to the effect of, I used to have it tattooed on me.
Yeah.
She does not ever mention, at least that I picked up, that she has a current tattoo, whether it's the 8-pointed star or not. So we still don't know what the deal is with the cauldron one. I'm really wondering if it was a bargain that she made and then it was completed.
It like came and went.
A wave,
I
yeah,
just feel like
came,
if
washed
that
over.
was,
There's the ink, and then it washed back, and it's gone. I have no idea, but yeah,
I will say, I don't think she would share that she has a bargain with the cauldron to someone like Bryce, who she is pretty suspicious of.
I agree. But we can confirm that it is not the 8-pointed star.